of the great state of New York. The quiet town of Watkins Glen is and forever will be the cornerstone of American road course racing. This week, it's NASCAR's turn to burn up the famed track. And this is NASCAR Performance, and we're coming up next. Welcome to NASCAR Performance. This week we head to Watkins Glen, the second and final road course of the season. And since we only do it twice a year, we thought it's time for a little comparison. So over the next half hour, we're going to compare and contrast things like transmissions, pit stops, even the track itself. Is Sonoma really that different from Watkins Glen? Well, that's why I have these guys, because they have all the answers. You know me, love them, the great Larry McReynolds and crew chief of the 48 Chevrolet, Chad Knaus.
Hello.
I noticed the back door was open. It's just off camera over there. I think that means our special little friend, someone let him in. And he's going to be coming back around.
He's out and about.
He's out and about. Someone let him out. He'll be back shortly, and we'll check in to see what trouble Jeff Hammond is into this week. But first, let's get into the full road course discussion and all of the turns. Before the show, something you didn't know, Larry and Chad were discussing what they called the different turns of the track at Watkins Glen. And there were some discrepancies. I thought it was kind of interesting. So guys, give me your own version of what you call each and every turn at the Glen.
Do you want the right version?
All right.
Oh,
I have the marker. I have the marker, so let's make it simple. Now, Watkins Glen, the course that we run, is just shy of 2.5 miles. But it's pretty simple. This is the front stretch here. This is turn 1. Now, even though this is the S's, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4. This is what we call the inner loop or the bus stop. This is 5. Now, we don't run the boot. They run the boot, the long course. That's when they have the Grand Am cars on their own weekend. So we have 5, left-handers 6, and this is 7. Again, we come straight up here. We do not run the boot. Now, that's pretty much 7 turns.
Well, that's not the way that it is. It's actually 1, right there, pretty simple. 2, 3, 4, which is the S's. This would be
so
turn 2.
You're in agreement
top
so
of the
far.
S's. We're good there.
Yeah.
We come down here. This is new, right? Recently new, I guess you'd say, especially for the old timers. So this is what's called the bus stop. So we don't really count that, right? Okay. We come into here. We call this 5, right through here. Now you got to come in through here. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. That's
so the difference is you
because this is the real track.
I have a simple question that I think can clear up who's right and who's wrong. How many races have you won at Watkins Glen?
Really?
You know the phrase. I'm just saying. Larry Mack has won a race there, so I would say no wonder he's not won a race there.
There's only 5 tracks on the circuit. Chad and Jimmy have not won at. Watkins Glen is one of them. Dang, Larry.
I'm gonna have to stay defeated on that. You got me.
Scores wins the game.
Okay,
right,
so I'm gonna change all my information tonight to get prepared for the next race.
And
up
Jimmy's
there.
gonna be all messed up
and
now.
Jimmy's gonna be turning right when he's supposed to be turning left.
The NASCAR Performance Show after Watkins Glen, we will be congratulating you for getting your first.
I got the corners right.
But you guys do bring up an interesting point that I think fans would like you to further discuss, and that is the boot. There are some drivers on the Sprint Cup Series, Tony Stewart most notably, that wishes we did run the boot. Guys, I'd love for you to weigh in. What do you think?
I'm telling you, I think we should. I really do. I think it generates some really, really good passing zones. As you can see, this is going to be another medium braking zone right through here. This is a tight 180 down through here. This is a pretty high braking because you're going over 90 degrees. So you're really going to come in here and really have to try to get set up for this little short straightaway. So I think it would be great. Obviously, we would have to change the race length, and it would change a lot of dynamics. But there's actually some really good seating back there. So I think it would be really good to have the boot.
And even though the boot has always been there, I have never heard anyone talk about Sprint Cup, NASCAR running the boot until Tony Stewart and Lewis Hamilton, when they swapped seats with Formula One and Sprint Cup. We actually aired the show on Speed, and they ran the boot. And Tony Stewart, one of the first things he said, we have got to convince NASCAR for us to run the long course. A lot to Chad's point, he said there's so many more passing zones when you run this long version.
Yep.
Tony and Lewis like to talk smack back and forth like the two of you do as well.
Let's see. One win, Larry Mack. 0. Chad Knaus. You do the math.
That's already twice, and we're only just starting the show, Chad. It's going to be a long half hour and still a whole lot more to talk about, including backwards pit stops.
It's good stuff.
Kind of. We'll get into it. But first, let's check in with our resident runaway, Jeff Hammond.
Hey, thanks, Danielle. Now, guys, I'd like to tell you right now, I'm here at CNR Racing, and we're doing some pretty cool stuff. Now, I know you guys are talking about the racetrack at Watkins Glen. You go ahead and do that, but check back with me in a little while because I have got some really cool parts to show you.
NASCAR Performance is brought to you by eHarmony.
NASCAR. Everything else is just a game.
Welcome back to NASCAR Performance. As we head to our second and final road course race of the Sprint Cup season, we thought we'd discuss what makes Watkins Glen and Sonoma different. Chad, what's the most glaring difference to you?
Obviously, I think from an observer standpoint, a casual fan, you would have to notice that the pit stops are a lot different. We come down the racetrack a little bit different, so we pit on the right-hand side. Just like we were just talking about the track configuration a moment ago, you can see as you come down off of what would be turn 11.
Turn what?
Turn 7.
I thought he said 11.
This is the cutout for pit road right here. You can see it's on the inside of the racetrack, just like normal, but it's on the right-hand side. So that means the pit crews have to change the way that they actually choreograph the pit stops because it's on the opposite side of the car. The fueler's on the right-hand side of the car as opposed to the left-hand side of the car. The tire changers may have to move around a little bit, so it adds a new element to it.
Yeah, I think what would give you an indication of the difference is if you just think about the ratios. You know, a driver around Watkins Glen is still going to shift about 9, 10, 11 times a lap, a lot like you would at Sonoma. The ratios in the transmission will not be that much different, but if you go to the rear end gear ratio that NASCAR mandates, you run almost 100 points higher gear at Watkins Glen than you do Sonoma. NASCAR mandates will let you run a 411 or a 422 at Watkins Glen. At Sonoma, it's a 500, a 514, or a 529. The other thing, Chad, I don't know if it's changed. It just seems like even though you still fight forward bite at Watkins Glen, not near as much as you would at Sonoma.
You don't fight the forward bite. And another thing is Watkins Glen is actually probably our most abusive on the brakes. You have very, very long straightaways going into very, very tight turns. Coming down the front straightaway into turn 1, you use a lot of brake. Very tricky braking into turn 1 because there's a pavement change. You're going downhill. A big chance for wheel hop. We've seen a lot of people wheel hop there towards the end of the races. We did a couple of years ago. Jeff Gordon did leading a couple of years ago. You go through the S's, you're coming down the long back straightaway. You're fourth gear, top speed going into the bus stop. Hard braking through there. So you use a lot of brake, a lot more than what you have at Sonoma.
Yeah, I've heard from some of the brake people like Performance Friction that's helped us with a lot of parts and pieces that at the end of that backstretch going into the inner loop or the bus stop, you'll see some of the highest pressure and highest temps, even at a place even versus like Martinsville or Loudon or Phoenix, somewhere like that.
And you were talking about, was it gear ratios with 500, 514?
That's the rear end gear ratios.
Okay.
You know, you still have the ratios in the transmission.
Okay.
At a road course, all NASCAR mandates, it has to be 1-to-1 in fourth gear. You can't run overdrive, but you have the selection of rear end gear ratios. They still mandate them, though, like they do at all the other racetracks.
And Chad, what makes a crew chief pick one over the other?
Well, what you'll do is, again, qualifying and race pace is one of the big things when you're going into that. So let's say if you think that the race pace is going to slow down a little bit or slow down a lot, you'll run a lower third or rear gear. So you would run the 422 versus the 411 in qualifying because you're going to be going so much faster. You're going to have higher RPM. One of the other big things is, I don't know if you touched on this or not, but turn 1, a lot of teams or some teams will run a first gear so you can come first or third, second, first, so you can get off there to get up through the S's. Other teams will not. You really have to play that back and forth strategy a little bit on whether or not you want to try to have a little bit more oomph coming off the corner with that first gear versus being in second gear.
Yeah, there's no free lunches. If you run that first gear that you would need in turn 1, it's a much higher first gear than you would run in the transmission if you were not going to use it. So when you do have a first gear that you run through turn 1, it can really hurt you on restarts and leaving your pit box.
And Chad, quickly, we heard this term a lot at Sonoma on the broadcast. Just define wheel hop again and what can cause it.
basically what happens when you have wheel hop, that's when the driver's downshifting, and maybe he doesn't match the RPM properly when he's going, let's say, from third gear to second gear. What happens when that is, the rear tires are trying to slow down and they're dragging everything back. Well, you end up with wrap-up in the driveline. The axles that we've talked about in the past, they'll start to twist along with the drive shaft, and that'll start to vibrate and pop up and down, and that's when the drivers can crash.
And forward bite is not something you can correct with your dentist. That's what you're trying to do when you're trying to hook up 800+ horsepower at the rear wheels, especially in a lower gear.
Jeff Hammond has a beautiful face. He'll tell you.
He has a beautiful face for radio.
And a mouthful of pearly whites. Speaking of, let's toss to Hollywood Hammond and see what he wants to discuss for Watkins Glen.
Well, Danielle, I know y'all been talking about the differences or the similarity between Sonoma and Watkins Glen, but when we come back, I want to show you what we used to run, some of the old style transmissions compared to the new style of the day that make these transmissions truly a work of art.
Saturday.
It is fun, it is frantic, it is plain fast.
Harmony.com.
The small town with the big reputation for racing.
The final road course event of the year.
Watkins Glen, New York.
How we looking here, kids?
Tony Stewart, the new road course king.
Kevin Harvick wins at the Glen.
Hell yeah, boys! What's up? Juan Pablo Montoya, his second Cup win.
Congratulations there, Ambrose.
And welcome back to NASCAR Performance. Now, we're here at CNR Racing, and we're working to try to show you folks the difference between an old-style transmission and a new-style transmission. So I've got me some help here today. Jeff Horton, call you Fuzzy, right?
That's right.
Appreciate you letting us come in here, Fuzzy.
You're welcome.
Now, look, I haven't seen one of these in a long time, but this is an old Muncie transmission that we used to race back when I started, and we really depended on transmissions like this or a T10 to get the job done, but, man, we've come a long way.
Right. This old Muncie transmission here, good high-performance street transmission, not particularly good for NASCAR racing. They shift a little bit slower. They're quiet, but they shift a little bit slower because they have a synchronizer ring in them.
Yeah, we got a synchronizer ring right here. This came out of a T10, but this is actually what we're talking about. This is a synchronizer ring, folks. But you've got what the modern technology has brought today. These are the straight cut gears we hear so much about.
Right, straight cut tooth gear here, and we also use dogs and dog rings right now. What that allows, the larger window here allows for a quicker, cleaner shift, as opposed to the really tight teeth here and the synchronizer band grabbing the gear.
Yeah, because these things here, they used to break them all the time. That was the worst thing about it. And once this breaks, you pretty much, you have a lot of trouble shifting gears. And that's something we were able to get away from because of, again, what you folks were able to come up with after we realized this was not getting the job done.
Correct.
Now, along that same line, I don't want to forget that we also have a better way as far as shifting. This is an old Hurst style shifter that, I mean, a lot of people hear about Hurst and Hurst shifters from back in the day, but this used to be like a side transmission or side rail where you shifted the gears. Today, we've moved into this modern, what I consider single rail shifter, which really also helps these drivers be more like a road racer. They can really get after it with this new design.
Correct. The older side shifters here were conducive to getting track grime and road grime in them, debris, clog up the shifting.
Now, something else when we talk about this transmission is that I notice is quite unique is that this here is a gear cluster. This is what you're putting together to go to, to Watkins Glen for somebody.
Correct.
So this transmission, when I look at it, not only do we see the straight cut gears, but also notice we got what looks to me like an inlet here to oil the transmission itself.
Correct. On the ovals, we run no oil pump, just run a splash box. On the road courses, we run this oil pump. Correct. So the lay shaft drives the oil pump takes the oil to a cooler, and then runs it back to the transmission. The cool oil feeds through the center, and then we've got a spray rail here that sprays each individual gear set with cool oil.
Now, when we talk about the gear set, we're able to mix and match because of the way these straight cut gears are done. So when we come out of making a practice run at Watkins Glen and we don't like, the driver says, I'm lugging a little bit here, I want to change it because I'm not getting maximum RPM. We either have another transmission or we can literally take this transmission apart and rebuild this thing and make it to where it's a lot more, I call it driver friendly.
Correct. We can change first, second, and third gear ratio. Fourth gear is 1-to-1.
Well, again, modern technology just continues to amaze me because we've come such a long ways from the original, angle cut gears and now the straight cut gears, the way we cool them, they're so durable. Because one thing, folks, we don't want to forget, and I think Fuzzy will back me up on this, these drivers, if you give them a rubber hammer and an anvil, they will tear it up. So you've got to make these things almost bulletproof. And
correct.
You guys have really done a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much, Jeff. I thought Hollywood Hammond was the best nickname I'd heard in quite some time, but Fuzzy, that tops the list.
That goes right to the top of the charts.
And Fuzzy, you were bringing it too with that information. As we talk more about transmissions and why NASCAR mandates the straight angle gears, Larry, what can you tell us?
Well, I think the biggest thing is explaining what we mean by straight cut gears. It's somewhat self-explanatory. It's pretty much the side of the gear to where the teeth are has to be 90 degrees. You can't be spherical cut or angled cut gears, and I think the biggest reason, this is much cheaper than when you start angle cutting gears in the transmission.
Yeah, when you're running helical cut gears, you have to get matched sets. So that is a lot more expensive, especially going to a road course because you have so many different options. With the straight cut gears, you can mix and match things a little bit more, and I think that's probably why NASCAR went to that, just to try to save the teams a little bit of money.
We only shift a few times a year. Watkins Glen, obviously one of the races where the drivers do so, and viewers at home saying, I have a stick shift, I love it. They don't buy a stick shift car by accident. And Larry, some drivers like the feel of it as well, more than others.
Well, it's such a durable transmission, and I don't know that there's that much difference in the way you shift the transmission, but the biggest thing is with the durability of this transmission, with the straight cut gears, with no dog rings or synchronizer rings, pretty much the real road racers will shift this thing upshift, downshift without the clutch. The only time they'll ever even go near the clutch pedal is when they come onto pit road or leaving pit road. You pretty much shift by just matching RPMs, which certainly it saves a lot of the durability on the clutch itself.
But I'll be honest with you, a good road racer, we've talked about wheel hop, we talked about it in the last segment, we've talked about it a bunch of times for the road course races. A real road racer, a guy that goes out there, uses the clutch, uses the brake, heel toe shifts, he has a less chance of wheel hopping and crashing than what these other guys do because they just jam it in gear. But when you engage the clutch, that releases a lot of the tension in the driveline and doesn't allow that wheel hop to occur. Like if you're going straight and you push in the clutch and you get on the brakes, you probably won't wheel hop. But if you're going straight and you push on the brakes, you're gonna wheel hop without pushing in the clutch. So there's a little bit of magic there if you can get it to work right.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot old school, new school. I know talking to Darrell Waltrip, won a number of races at Riverside, California, a road course we used to go to. He said, I finally acclimated myself that I was okay upshifting without the clutch. And of course, that's something like drivers even did last week at Pocono. But he said, I just could not make myself drive off in a corner, downshifting. As much as I wanted not to use that clutch, it was a comfort thing using the clutch on the downshift.
And you talk about being cost effective, Chad. Is it a foregone conclusion that you only have one road course for both that you run in the Sprint Cup Series each year?
I'd say you have one road course car. A lot of teams will actually take maybe an older short track car or maybe a current short track car, turn that into the backup because you can get very similar geometries if you get to work. You have to change some components around, you might have to move some pivot points, but you can get there. But it's a little bit different, but you don't necessarily need to have two of them.
And back in your day, you said that it was more
yeah, you could run more offset in the car, and we started going to Watkins Glen in 1986, and Watkins Glen is more right-hand turns. And in Finion, or what's now Sonoma, left and right, we would run what we call a straight-up car, but we would put more emphasis on offsetting where we could focus on turning to the right at Watkins Glen.
Time for a viewer email. This comes from Ron Smith. He asks, a short time ago, you explained the gear ratios from the transmission to the rear gear. When the pinion gear turns the ring gear, one full turn, is that equivalent to one full turn of the wheel? Good question.
That is a great question. I'm glad you were paying attention. And you're exactly right, because our axles are singular splined, okay? So that means we've got one set of splines that goes into the center section of the rear end housing, one set of splines that comes to the drive plates. When the ring gear turns one full rotation, that's exactly what you'll have, a 1-to-1 ratio of the ring gear going to the hub, which is in turn going to the wheel.
I hope the viewers are paying attention always, because we like to involve them and we give them nuggets, as Larry Mack likes to say, or in this case, I know you do, or in this case, a NASCAR performance factoid.
Oh, yes, and we like that. So just so you guys know, the first Watkins Glen Sports Car Grand Prix was held in 1948. We like that last part of that number, on 6.6 miles of public streets around the village. It was the first post-World War II road race held in the United States, and it marked the revival of American road racing.
And Jeff Hammond was there.
NASCAR Fast Friday is live from the Glen. Saddle up for this road course rodeo. Chase hopes will be rocked. Tempers will flare.
Trouble in turn 2. David Rudeman hard into the wall. He is upside down.
Here comes Ambrose hard in the throttle.
Side by side for the lead. Marcus Ambrose, the new race leader at Watkins Glen. And I got right back to his bumper, man. Hell of a race.
Welcome back to NASCAR Performance. Time to tie up a few loose ends before we say goodbye and go racing at the Glen. Let's talk pit road, guys. We had a short discussion on that, and it is very interesting, Chad, and it seems qualifying is important.
It is, obviously, for track position, but pit selection is really crucial here. Obviously, pit road is very long, and there's some obstacles on pit road. One of the biggest ones being about pit stall 11 or 12, I believe it is. Pit road really takes a dive going downhill. And we actually got busted there a couple of years ago running a nationwide race. We were running really well. We came down for our pit stop, and I said, okay, Jimmy, we got to save fuel from this point, and I think we can make it to the end of the race. So what he did going down pit road is he shut the engine off. Well, as we know, the way you monitor your pit road speed is by looking at your RPM. So he didn't know how fast he was going, and we got in trouble for speeding down pit road because we were rolling downhill. So it can be a little tricky. So you want to qualify well so you get that good pit selection.
Yeah, and I hate to wear this out, but it's pretty much the story anytime we go to a road course, and that's pretty much running the race backwards, knowing what your fuel window is, and making sure that you pretty much back up from 90 laps, which is the total laps of the race there. And actually, Paul Andrews with Jeff Bodine, I think, really started this format back in 1996 when they won the race there. So pretty much 90 laps, your hopes would be that you can make it a two-stop race. But also, I'll go back to last year when those knuckleheads start running into each other. We had a green-white checkered, 2 extra laps last year.
It's hard to talk about Watkins Glen and your driver, Jimmy Johnson, without talking of the infamous wreck that, thank gosh, he walked away from.
It was an exciting wreck. That was back when Jimmy was running the Nationwide Series, coming down into turn 1, lost the brakes, jumped over what was then a sand trip, and right into a big styrofoam block. And Jimmy came out with arms in the air. I made it. I survived. And it was pretty dramatic.
Until he met Chad Knaus, that's pretty much what he was known for.
How many wins do they have together at the Glen?
Well, let's see, just...
Oh, the big old goose egg.
Jeez. Change this.